Thank you, Glenna. My name is Jim Mitulski, and I'm an MCC minister and a UCC minister, and I'm also on the board of the LGBTQ Religious Archives Network. And I bring you greetings this afternoon, this evening, depending upon what coast you're on, as we come together to celebrate the life of Virginia Ramey Mollenkott. I know we were all saddened to hear about her passing in October, was when many of us heard about it, but she passed on September 25th of last year. And I know that for many of us, while we know there will be a formal memorial service for her sometime after COVID, we wanted to have an opportunity to come together to celebrate this theologian, activist, writer, catalyst, world changer before too much time had passed. Now, we are so grateful to have the presence of Virginia's son, Paul, from whom we will hear a little bit later in the service, and his wife, Barbara, and other family members here. To have Deborah Morrison here also, who has been such a stalwart supporter of Virginia through so many things in her life and even after she has passed. This is as much a way for us to say thank you to them as it is to celebrate Virginia's life. You know, we know as people of faith that while we mourn her passing from our lives, we know that she lives eternally. And when you see how many people are gathered here, this is really a tribute to Virginia, to the way that she lives not only eternally in God's heart and memory, but the way she still lives with us, among us, in our hearts and in our memories. We know that love is stronger than death. And Virginia is one of the strongest people that any of us ever knew. So she's here. Think of her as here, feel her here, experience her presence, recall a memory as we go through this celebration. This is a time to remember, to celebrate, to feel what you feel. We've assembled a group of people who, while not comprehensive, I believe are representative. And I want to thank my colleague, Reverend Dr. Justin Tannis from United Theological Seminary, who also worked to pull this together in a very particular way so that we could have this celebration. And I hope that you will enjoy hearing from the people that we've assembled. And we hope to have a time at the end where people can share memories or ways that your life was touched by Virginia's life and legacy during this at the end of the ceremony. I do want to say that my own experience of Virginia was mostly as a pastor of MCC San Francisco, where she was a preacher and well loved. And in my years, particularly in MCC, she was what we would call a canon theologian. What that means is that her life, her work, her ministry, what she said, what she taught was formative for our own liberation work. I first met her in 1983 at a meeting of the National Council of Churches in Hartford, Connecticut, where they were putting together a very dangerous book, an extremely dangerous book that you can still find in some ministers' libraries. It's the Inclusive Language Lectionary. And she was a principal editor and compiler of this work. At the time, at the National Council of Churches, they said it might lead to the end of Christianity if we found a way to talk about God that was not strictly solely through male terms. I have a very distinct impression of one critic describing it as a lesbian feminist plot, and hearing Virginia and the other editors of the work breaking into hysterical, uproarious laughter at this, because guess what? It was. Virginia changed the world, changed the church. And here's what I know as a minister from talking to many people, because I served a LGBT church for many years in San Francisco's Castro district. This is what people told me over and over and over again. She saved lives. And I know that some of the people whose lives she saved may be here today. And I know that if you knew her, you knew that. So welcome to this gathering. I want to urge you afterwards to look at virginiamollenkott.com. That's a website that has her writings and writings about her, articles, and other ways that you can remember Virginia that's being maintained still, even after she has died. And I hope that you'll stay through this service, and there will be a recording available of it afterwards, and that you'll enjoy these speakers. We also will have quotes by Virginia. And after Reverend Janie Spar has spoken, who'll be our first speaker and who will open us in prayer also, you'll hear a quote, one of 4 quotes that we'll share with you. But this very first opening quote talks about Kirkridge, which was one of the most important places in the world to Virginia and to many other people as well. It was the crucible of liberation, the cradle of liberation, the womb of liberation for many LGBT people, an actual place. And it was important to Virginia, not only for what she did there for others, but what it and the people there did for her. So let's enjoy remembering Virginia's life together and enjoying her presence with us now. I'm going to turn it over to Reverend Janie Spar.
Thank you, Jim, so much. I'm so grateful to be here with you and to say that I first met her, I think, at one of those evangelical concern conferences. And then, of course, there was Clout, Christian Lesbians Out Together, which was this rascally group. And of course, there was the Bay Area Lesbian Gay Ecumenical Association, in which Dick Hasme started. And we said, who would be our first speaker that would just bowl us over? And that was, here she came, Virginia Mollenkott with Deborah. And what a time we had. So rascally and fun and authentic. And I guess it's all those parts of her that I just treasure so much. So will you pray with me, please? Compassionate one of many names, we're grateful to celebrate Virginia Mollenkott. She was known as mother, sister, aunt, grandmother, beloved, niece, teacher, mother-in-law, mentor, and friend, who continues to inspire us through her amazing writing and speech, who reached in and helped us grow from where we were to where we are and into forever becoming. Oh, loving one, we invite Virginia to listen in to all the ways she has and continues to impact our lives. We're grateful, Virginia. We're grateful for your son, Paul, and daughter-in-law, Barbara, for partners, Deborah and Esther, for friends who journeyed with you intimately, for you have shared and known great love. Oh, we loved your unconditional love, your humor, your laughter resounds inside of us, your brilliance, your way with words, your articulation of how sexuality and spirituality befriended one another in you, and thus helped us find that friendship inside ourselves. Your feminist teachings gave us insight into patriarchy and empire, and your outstanding feminist biblical scholarship stunned us. Your authentic respect and kindness toward so many helped us explore and even begin to embrace and now look at and live into our gender expression, fluidity, and non-binary selves. Oh, you kept learning and kept coaxing us to learn more with you. So we thank you for helping us dig deeper than we thought we dared, for we watched you and learned with you and from you, and together mutually, we came together to know more of who we were and who we are. I guess most of all, it's how you loved us, cared for us, inspired us to become more authentically ourselves. So compassionate one of many names, where mystery and wonder embrace Virginia, where family and friends too gather with her within that great cloud of witnesses, where the Jesus she knew here is now known fully to her there. Oh, Virginia, may you hear in this sacred space from so many of us who love you and now share with you how much your life has touched ours in such profound and meaningful ways. Oh, Holy One, be with her and know Virginia. It is with deepest gratitude that we thank you until we are together again. Amen.
Those first meetings were like everything I've read about base communities. We were like the wounded people telling each other we were all right, telling each other this is not really God's will that we be treated the way we're being treated. And that was wonderful. Now my job when I first entered that, I went as a participant the first year, and it did wonders for me. I mean, community, there's nothing like community. No amount of theorizing could have done for me what happened when I went there. Because I saw Carter Hayward, and I saw John McNeil, and I saw these wonderful people, about 100 people, and they were all such leaders and so wonderful, vibrant Christians. And they were gay and lesbian. And I came home, and I just started to work on my closet door right then, because I thought I could doubt myself. I could never doubt these people. Never. But when I went as a speaker, which I did the following year and have been doing it ever since, the first thing I had to do was feminism, because these guys didn't know any oppression except being gay. Then I had a first idea. I will still remember the year I was the woman speaker, and John Boswell of Yale was the male speaker. And my first lecture, his first lecture, was full of androcentric language, on and on, you know. And God, he, and everybody was he. And I gave a lecture on God language. And when it was over, I was talking to somebody over here, and I realized this angelic creature was kneeling in front of me, and it was John Boswell. And I said, "Your suit is granted," or something, you know, like that, flippant. And he said, "I will never do that again. You have convinced me." But the second lecture was cleaned up completely. Very smart man. He was able to just go through and change it all, just like that.
Hello, my name is Reverend Nancy Wilson, and I first met Virginia in the late 1970s, and I also wanted to just say thank you to everyone who organized this today, by the way. Currently I'm the co-pastor of MCC in Venice, Florida, and semi-retired as moderator of Metropolitan Community Churches. And Virginia and Letha Scanzoni had just recently published in the 70s, "Is the Homosexual My Neighbor?" And it was an open secret among some of us that Virginia was a lesbian, although she was still publicly closeted. As an evangelical feminist, she was an English professor and biblical scholar who wrote with devastating clarity and power. She was external to MCC as a witness to our revolutionary message. Such persons were rare and always beloved by us. In fact, in honor of the fact that today is Valentine's Day, I'm reminded that Virginia, whether she knew it or not, was a heartthrob for lesbians of a certain era. Paula, my wife, called her Old Blue Eyes and always waited online to be hugged by her. Throwing off fundamentalism made Virginia accessible in every way. She embraced us with a shamelessness that was healing. She also spoke with passion about feminism and Jesus in that great New Jersey accent. She spoke to our MCC General Conference in 1979 and wrote for the Christian Century that year about the bomb scare we experienced Sunday morning at the Bonaventure Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. My best memory, perhaps, is at the National Council of Churches meeting in Hartford, the one Jim Matulski talked about in 1983, at which the National Council postponed indefinitely, meaning denied essentially, our bid for membership, which had been unanimously approved by the membership committee. Virginia was on the NCC's, of course, Inclusive Language Committee, which published the Inclusive Language Lectionary, which was being unveiled at that meeting. Her writing and skills, her biblical insight were a perfect fit for that controversial project. When it was her time to speak on the project to the General Assembly, she interjected a warning to the National Council of Churches. She said, "Whatever you do to my sisters and brothers in the Metropolitan Community Church, you do to me," she thundered. Necks snapped around the room. There were lots of murmurs. Later at dinner, Virginia was convinced that she had come out of the closet in that statement. Of course, it took a while longer and several more efforts before she was completely out and people completely got it. While she received a lot of painful rejection for coming out as a lesbian, that paled in comparison to the death threats and the horrific harangue that she and others received for creating the inclusive language lectionary. In fact, at that meeting in Hartford, the FBI was present and tried to help the committee members stay safe during that public meeting. Over the years, Virginia became a friend in whose home I was privileged to stay and whose love and support I cherished. In fact, I have saved many notes from Virginia in her beautiful longhand. Whether she was supporting me in a book launch or in some activism as moderator of MCC or in pursuing further education, she was always so kind, so encouraging. There are many like me who received support, nurture, and help from her. She was as generous with her praise as she was with her sharp, unrelenting critique of patriarchy. She was courageous in every area of her life, including confronting transphobia and coming out about her gender identity. She never stopped becoming who she was. Today, I bless Virginia for her many transformations and her boundary-breaking revelations over a lifetime of mentoring so many of us. She was strong, truthful, and vulnerable in ways that gave all of us courage and hope. Thank you.
I'm Justin Sabia Tannis. I'm an assistant professor and director of social transformation program at United Theological Seminary. And Nancy and I didn't coordinate, but I'm going to pick up a number of threads that Nancy had started with. I met Virginia several times, but what I want to talk about is the way in which her work had a significant effect on my own ministry, scholarship, and teaching and writing that continues really to this day. And by the way, I love introducing my students to the inclusive language lectionary. So I have it right here. But I want to highlight two specific moments or two specific things from her writing that I think are really important. First is from the homosexual my neighbor? I recently reread that as part of some of my own work that I'm doing on the Good Samaritan, but also in preparation to teach a class next fall that includes the history of LGBTQ and queer theology. So I've been getting to reread books by a number of people on this panel, including Virginia. And it's been a wonderful experience. But at the time it was written, it was such an incredibly important book as we've heard already. And I want to highlight that she started with this question of, is the homosexual my neighbor? This question that the title poses, and that the very first words of the book immediately answer it. And she starts her preface saying, the question that makes up the title of this book shouldn't be necessary. After all, Jesus made it clear that every person is our neighbor. And the Bible is likewise clear on what our responsibility is to our neighbor: love. Yet it seems that all through history, some group or another has been singled out as unworthy to be our neighbor. Some social category, which one varies according to time and place, we look down upon as less than fully human, and its members are robbed of respect, opportunity, and sometimes of life itself. We ostracize them, we assault their dignity, we tear down their pride, and yet we hypocritically claim to love them. We Christians need to learn a lot about love. At a time when there were very few books about the people we now call LGBTQ, certainly not from an affirming perspective, although some of the folks on this call have written some of those early books as well. Letha Scanzoni and Virginia Mollenkott clearly point out that the problem is not those on the outside. It is not the homosexual. It is those who do not recognize who is their neighbor, every person. And this methodology has been really inspiring to me in my writing and teaching, that she uses the heart of the Christian gospel as a mandate for compassion, inclusion, and relationship. This isn't about knocking on the door and being asked to be let in, but rather a reckoning with the radical inclusiveness of Jesus Christ. And she is one of many voices that remind us that the outsider is the spiritual exemplar of Jesus's teaching about neighborliness and the dominion of God, and that justice is central to our faith. But as a transgender writer and scholar, I want to focus on her work Omnigender, First of all, her groundbreaking way of continuing to expand what inclusion looks like, what her identity is, what all of our identities are, and how those relate to our faith. This was one of the first major publications on gender identity and religion as a separate book. There are a few chapters before, most notably by people like Victoria Kolakowski, but this was different, and it came from a major religious publisher. And through this book, Virginia blazed a trail for other transgender scholars like me and others on this call. We would not have been published nearly as early as we did, if at all, if she hadn't made a way for us through this book. And in Omnigender, she details many reasons why inclusion of gender expansive people is vital and needed, how exclusion and oppression harm. But my very favorite part of the book is the conclusion, which she dreams of an omnigendered society in which people are free to be themselves and we are not limited by this binary of gender. And she starts with this vision because, as she points out, very true to her scriptural rootedness, that without a vision, the people perish, and that transgender leaders were already at risk of burnout from the stresses of leading an imperiled people and could be bolstered by visions of justice to come. So I want to close with my favorite passage where she points out that tying our selfhood, tying the body to individualism, to appearances, to distinct physical characteristics like gender, limits all of us in such dramatic ways. And she speaks in this context with this lovely vision of mortality and immortality, which I thought was very appropriate for this occasion. And she writes, recognizing that the body is not solid and separate as it appears to be, breath mingling with other breath, molecules interwhirling in a constant exchange of energy, opens human beings to community, to an interindebtedness that is both mortal and immortal. By mortal interindebtedness, I mean that because in this world our bodies are mortal and in a constant state of flux, we owe one another compassion and an insistence on justice for every body. But because there is spirit in each of us that was not born with our bodies and will not die with them, we also owe one another the awed respect due to one manifestation of the eternal by another manifestation of the eternal, an immortal interindebtedness that pulses with spirited desire and joy. Thank you.
My name is Reverend Harry Knox. I am a retired faith justice advocate, and I think today representing in very small part a very large group of people. Those folks Jim Metulsky recognized as having found a literal lifeline in Virginia Mollenkott's work. She saved my life. As I look around the page of participants in the panel and those of you who are watching, I see friends of many, many years. But you were not in my life in 1982. None of you that I can think of were in my life in 1982. I had hair in my eyes and down my back. You didn't know me then, but Virginia Mollenkott was in my life. Through the book, Is the Homosexual My Neighbor? I crept as a very frightened, very depressed, very hormonal, very called to ministry young man into the library at the University of Georgia, having moved to Athens from my hometown in rural South Georgia, where there were no resources and no one available to talk about being gay. I crept into that library begging God for a sign of some kind that I could find, a little something that would validate and give me vocabulary for what I was hearing and feeling in my prayer life, that I was in fact a child of God and that I was not destined to oblivion, at least, and something worse if so all those preachers I had heard as a kid were right. I went to the card catalog. Do you remember the card catalog? And I found a little card, and it had those red hot words on it. Is the homosexual my neighbor? Oh my. I wrote down the call number, and I surreptitiously wended my way up to the stacks of the library and got out that little green book. I'll never forget what it looked like. And I opened it up and slurped up like a person lost in the desert would slurp at water found. Every word. I hid the book inside larger volumes so that no one would see me. I didn't dare check it out, because to check it out in 1982 would be to attach my name with that title. And that would do in my ministry in the United Methodist Church, the thing that meant more to me than life itself in those days. I was unwise on about 1,000 different levels, but Virginia Mollenkott found me in my need and helped to move me into a safe space, from which she then over the years called me into greater and greater understanding as I learned to read with more clarity and more deeply. Her work expanded, and she led all of us to see a God with as many faces as God needs to be able to speak love to each of us with all of our faces, in all of our gender expressions, in all of our very, very different lives. Dear Virginia, you saved my life. You gave me vocabulary for my ministry, and I will be forever grateful, and I look forward to seeing you again.
Hello, friends. My name is William Stell. I'm a PhD student in the Department of Religion at Princeton University, as well as an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ. And I could not be more honored, more humbled to be speaking a few words alongside these saints, these giants. I only got to know Virginia over the past few years, and I got to know her as a historian, which means I know her in a quite distant way, but also in a strikingly intimate way. I never met her in the flesh. I only spoke with her on one occasion, but I have immersed myself and am still immersing myself as a doctoral student in her words. Not just the many, many, many published words. In addition, for 2 days in Berkeley, a year or two ago now, I was perusing her archival record. And I took over 1,000 little photos on my phone, photos of letters and notes and handwritten essays and handwritten edits to typed essays, and compared them all. And I was working so hard to trace as many footsteps of her journey as I could. And ever since then, I have been sifting through and soaking up her words. As historians do, I then wrote some words of my own and bounced it off of a bunch of people, and then wrote some more words. And then out of the blue, before I knew it, I was being introduced by email to Virginia herself. What's more, I sent her some of the stuff that I had written, which of course was terrifying. And then we scheduled a phone conversation. It lasted 3 hours. It was recorded. And it was 4 months before she died. I am so, so grateful that at both the beginning and the end of that conversation, I just got to say thank you. One of my professors frequently tells his students, don't let your historical subjects become your heroes. One of these days I will have to tell him that I have failed, and it's all Virginia's fault. Because how could any of us not root for this person? Her remarkable resilience from childhood on, her giftedness in teaching and in preaching, her incisive analyses and enviable eloquence, her fierce commitment to working toward justice, her courage in standing up to the forces that would thwart it, and her miraculous ability to find, in the midst of pain, in the midst of loss, in the unknown, to find opportunity for growth and ever expanding love. If there is one thing that I have learned from Virginia, and that I want her words to keep teaching me, it's to not be afraid of the journey, wherever it leads. Thank you.
My name is Jean Richardson, and I am privileged and honored to be the director of Kirkridge Retreat and Study Center. And it is a gift to be here tonight to celebrate the life of Virginia Ramey Mollenkott, a person who was a courageous pioneer, a person of deep and abiding faith, who worked on behalf of justice for all of us in the LGBTQ+ community. Virginia came to Kirkridge Retreat Center for decades, beginning in the late 1970s. She came for at least 2 times a year and was a leader in Christian People of the Rainbow, and also for her beloved sisterly retreat that continues to this day. I wanted to read to you just a bit about the setting, and so many of us have been talking about Is a Homosexual My Neighbor, and what a lifeline that book was. And she opens her writing in Gathered at the Table, which is a history of Kirkridge, with this statement. The late 1970s were dismal times for gay and lesbian Christians. In Florida, bumper stickers sported the motto, "Kill a queer for Christ," and popular evangelists called gay people, quote, the devil himself, who would, quote, as soon kill you as look at you. So when a Jesuit priest named John McNeil published his book, The Church and the Homosexual, in 1976, he brought hope to many LGBT Christians, both Catholic and Protestant. Simultaneously, Kirkridge stepped up to become the first well-known Christian conference center to offer a retreat for those who identified as gay, lesbian, and Christian, a retreat later called the Christian People of the Rainbow. And I often tell the story that I remember reading the advertisement for this retreat. I remember it was on the bottom right-hand side of Christian Century. And while I had never heard of this place called Kirkridge, I knew that there was some place in the world that I might be welcome. So continuing with Virginia, my first weekend at the Gay Lesbian Christian Conference was transforming for me, as it was for so many other LGBT people. Being at Kirkridge with so many other vibrantly spiritual people convinced me that the evil projected upon them was false. And the same projections were just as false about me. Self-respect and eventually coming out were much easier to achieve after that weekend. What I want to lift up about Virginia is that she was always on the journey with us. She was always vulnerable, and she walked over the time that I knew her, which was about 15 years, Every year she grew in her understanding of what it was to be a Christian and what it was that she would call us to. She was an amazing scholar. She demanded the best of herself in her own preparation and how she carefully crafted every description for each program. And she asked the best of us to be serious scholars of our texts as well. She was a prophet. She stayed one step ahead of us year after year, and she called us to draw our circles wider and wider and wider. She also was a pastor. How many evenings she spent writing letters, answering phone calls, assuring people, caring about people. She was for so many lifelines as they were walking their own journey. At the top of Kirkridge, we've now planted a tree, and I was insistent that it was at the top of Kirkridge at Nelson Lodge. And it reminds me every time that I go in that building for me to have courage and for me to live up to who I am called to be. It also is a tree that hopefully in time will provide great shade, because that's what she also offered to us. That it will be a tree where we will find comfort and rest, because she so generously offered to us so much comfort and rest and acceptance for who we were as people of faith on the journey.
Well, I don't think we've talked enough about how much the feminist community and the lesbian community have meant to me. At Families 2000, for instance, of the National Council of Churches conference that was held in 1991. It seemed Families 2000, I guess they were looking to the future, so they held it in Chicago in 1991. And I was one of the Bible teachers. And a Cuban woman, Ophelia Ortega, was the other Bible teacher. And first two sessions, I was just wildly popular with this group, many of whom were pastors. So the third time up, I mentioned that I was lesbian. You know, right away the whole place was just in a stew. And one black guy came to see me and he said, well, you know, just because I don't approve of your theologically, you know, does that mean I'm not your brother? And I said, no, not to me. I said, would you, if they came to drag me away to the ovens, would you object? Oh yes. I said, then you're my brother. I don't care, you know, I don't need your approval, but I do need somebody to care about my humanity. And he said, okay, all right, you know. But there was just, the whole conference was buzzing about this. So the next morning, Ophelia Ortega gets up. She says a good word for gay people. God bless her heart, and for me, you know. And she, you know, knew enough about solidarity from Latin America. She wasn't going to let anybody stand alone. Carter Hayward came and sat and held my hand the whole service so that everybody could see that we support one another, you know. So it was fun. And you know, my third presentation was on, my final presentation was on the Beatitudes, and they gave me a standing ovation knowing I was a lesbian. So I thought, well, you know, thank God.
Hear two pieces.
My name is Glenna Shepherd, and I am a recently retired pastor, having served congregations in both the United Church of Christ and Metropolitan Community Churches. Like most everyone who has spoken, Virginia's scholarship, her writing, and her speaking have influenced my ministry, my teaching, and my preaching. She indeed saved my life as well. But there's another aspect of Virginia's being that I want to share today before I play for you her very favorite hymn. I met Virginia in the mid-1980s at an EEWC conference. Virginia was a keynote speaker, as she often was, and I was the music director for that conference. I was in the process of coming out in the context of the United Methodist Church, where I served as music director, and also discerning a call to pastoral ministry, debating whether to go to seminary or not if I was a lesbian. And to say that I needed help was an understatement. I knew Virginia might be someone that I could talk with. I knew that she would be able to help. So after her keynote, I took a seat in the auditorium, sitting there reading my book, waiting for her to talk with all those who had thronged around her. I don't know what prompted her to look up, but even with the crowd of people around her, Virginia saw me. She excused herself, came over to me, put her hand on my arm and said, "You look like you need to talk. Let's have dinner." Her attention and kindness, her accessibility and compassion changed my life. I immediately became a fan and read everything I could get my hands on that she wrote. So it's my deep honor to be able to play for you now her favorite hymn, written by Robert Lowry, an American Baptist preacher and songwriter. Some of the lyrics to this hymn are these: "I lift my eyes, the cloud grows thin. I see the blue above it. And day by day this pathway smooths since first I learned to love it. No storm can shake my inmost calm, while to that refuge clinging. Since love is Lord of heaven and earth, how can I keep from singing?"
My name is Cameron Partridge, and I am the rector of St. Ayden's Episcopal Church in San Francisco, which you can see behind me. It's a huge honor to be able to share among this group. Thank you for the invitation to do that. As far as I can recall, I first came across the work of Virginia Ramey Mollenkott in 2001. I had come out in college in 1993, but had felt that my queerness, a word I identified with, was as much about gender as it was about sexuality, if not more so. I had begun to identify with an expansive gender transgressive sense of the word transgender around 1997, in the middle of my MDiv, and with the word genderqueer shortly thereafter. And while I didn't feel unsupported, I did feel isolated, particularly in the Episcopal Church, my tradition, and particularly as one who felt called to ordain ministry within that tradition. Nothing I was reading in queer theology up to that point, or hearing about in my tradition's ongoing conversations in the area of sexuality, was speaking to this facet of my context or experience. And like Dr. Mollenkott, I had read and been impacted by Leslie Feinberg's book, Stone Butch Blues, as well as writing by Kate Bornstein and Ricky Wilchins, and was eager to see how some of the ideas in these and other sources might come into conversation with work in queer and early Christian theologies in which I was steeping myself. And then I want to say in summer or fall of 2001, when I was in the ordination process and was starting to come out as trans and was starting my doctoral work, I came across the book Omnigender. It was in a bookstore, and my eyes got wide and I just snapped it right up. I was so inspired to see someone engaging in theological work that had an expansive conception of gender, that critiqued the gender binary and did not assume that trans people simply have reinscribed it. One of my favorite sort of early lines from Omnigender critiquing the binary reads, "Either a person must self-define as exclusively male or female or else admit to being a mutant." Mutant. Here was someone who pointed to the connections between misogyny, homophobia, biphobia, and transphobia. Here was someone who truly got that we should not have to wait to finish the sexuality debates before fully embracing trans people in and beyond religious communities. Here was someone who in 2001 saw the United States as in a gender crisis. Here was someone who saw our lives as interconnected, our struggles bound up with one another, who could embrace the likes of me and people that I knew and know and love. There are so many theological strands that Dr. Mollenkott pioneered in Omnigender, way too many to even try to name. But today, what strikes me, and I that clearly did not coordinate this with Justin, is the call in the closing chapter of the book for collective work across lines of difference grounded in a shared spiritual vision. In my time, Dr. Mollenkott says, I have seen various social activists fall by the wayside for lack of a coherent source of spiritual renewal, a vision of God and humankind that could sustain them when their cause suffered setbacks and postponement, and hope deferred made their hearts sick. Unquote. The omnigender movement that Mollenkott describes has a sense of shared care, critique, and compassion grounded in collective embodiment. And here I have a long quote that overlaps substantially with Justin's, but I'm going to read it again anyway. Recognizing that the body is not solid and separate as it appears to be, breath mingling with other breath, molecules interwhirling in a constant exchange of energy, opens human beings to community, to an inter-indebtedness that is both mortal and immortal. By mortal indebtedness, I mean that because in this world, our bodies are mortal and in a constant state of flux, we owe one another compassion and an insistence on justice for everybody, unquote. Thank you, Virginia Mollenkott, for your pioneering generosity of spirit and expansive vision. I wish that I could have met you in person or on Zoom or over the phone. And I lift up my heart today in gratitude for the possibilities that you manifested in this world for me and for so many others. Thank you.
Y'all, I'm going to be the one that cries, just busts out and starts weeping. I'm just warning you now. It's truly an honor to be here in this circle of folk who loved and were loved by Virginia. I first met Virginia in 1995 in Rochester, New York at a Christian Lesbians Out Together event. This was ground zero for the lesbian feminist plot that Jim referred to at the top of the hour. I remember that Carter sent greetings, Mary sent greetings, and I was in this circle with Virginia Mollenkott and others. It meant the world to me as a 24-year-old baby dyke to be in that circle. Virginia showed us that you do not have to be ordained as clergy to rock the foundations of Christendom. In so many ways, I owe my 2 decades of uppity, impatient, transgender organizing to that circle and to the knowledge that I could sit shoulder to shoulder with the likes of a great one like Virginia Mollenkott. Deborah, that's where I met you too. Thank you for loving Virginia all these years. I didn't attend Virginia's events at Kirkridge directly. I was the next generation at Kirkridge. We were called LGBTQ young adults on the mountain, but we too are a part of Virginia's legacy on that special land. But what makes Virginia really special to me is the way she bridged that lesbian feminist plot and what we now call the transgender conspiracy. Virginia is my elder sibling, now transcestor in faith. Virginia made a way for so many of us to become self-loving lesbian feminists, and together we've worked to make a way for self-loving transgender folk to join the conversation. Virginia and I were corresponding in the late 1990s as I was building the very first trans faith website, and while Virginia was writing Omnigender. We reconnected face-to-face more recently while I was writing Otherwise Christian, a guidebook for transgender liberation, and after beloved Susanna had already transitioned. Among other things, we had quite a discussion about pronouns. Virginia was an English professor and had strong feelings about words and books. He didn't mind being called she. They didn't mind being called he. I'm going to use he because Virginia is so well known, and for good reason, as being a lesbian feminist woman, and less well known as being a groundbreaking transgender Christian leader. By 2001, his book Omnigender was coming out, and we at the staff, as the staff of The Other Side magazine, were working on the May-June 2001 issue of the magazine, which had 4 articles about transgender experience, including one by Virginia. Those articles are what inspired me to begin work on Otherwise Christian 2, Stories of Resistance. Virginia's article, Gender, Diversity, and Christian Community, opens that anthology of 29 transgender, intersex, and non-binary voices. It bridges the generation. And so I'm so grateful to have been able to have her permission to include that article. When we sat in his apartment on one of our visits, Virginia talked about how disturbed he was about what was happening to intersex children being cut by doctors at early ages and without consent. Virginia said he thought to himself back in the day, back in 1999 or 2000, what can I do to help? I'm a writer. I'll write a book. And Omnigender indeed stands alone, easily a decade of most other efforts in terms of including intersex experience in Christian theological consideration. On my last visit with Virginia, I didn't know on my way that he was so unwell. We'd postponed a visit because of pandemic. He acknowledged that he should have canceled on me, but he just didn't want to do that, just like he didn't want to stop living independently in the apartment that he had shared with Susanna. He had requested that I bring an Italian hoagie. They weren't serving food in the dining hall because of the pandemic. We ate together. I gave him a copy of Liam Hooper's new book, Transforming Proclamation, a transgender theology of daring existence. It felt like full circle in some way, connecting their work to this new book coming out. I recently saw that Virginia had published something in 2010 about a transforming ethics. I didn't even know that when I handed him the book. Virginia was unwell. I knew that he wouldn't be able to read it. I knew he wanted to. I wished we had more time. I rubbed his shoulders with an ointment he asked for. I tried to adjust his pillows to minimize his pain. I kissed him on the forehead and I said, I love you. As I left, I feared I might not see him again. Virginia is my elder sibling. Virginia is with Susanna now. Virginia will be with us always. We will carry on your legacy. We love you, and we will carry on. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I'm Mary Hunt from WATER, the Women's Alliance for Theology, Ethics, and Ritual. I want to thank Jim and Justin and the other board and staff members of LGBTQ Religious Archives Network for organizing this lovely event to honor Virginia's memory. That it's being held on Valentine's Day only adds to the luster, since so many of us share a love for Virginia that mirrors her deep love for all of us. I want to also express my sympathy to Virginia's family and to thank them for sharing her so generously with us. Let me share two moments about Virginia, whom I knew by reputation in the 1970s, but only got to know in the 1980s and later. We both participated in the Gay, Lesbian, Christian weekends at the ever hospitable Kirkridge Retreat and Study Center in Bangor, Pennsylvania. And later, of course, at the sisterly conversations there that have meant so much to so many of us, thanks to Virginia's leadership. My first memory is one Sunday in a year I cannot recall, when she was preaching at a Protestant church in Washington, D.C., not far from where I live. I decided I had to go to see her in person to better appreciate her work. I had simply read it, but I wanted to see her. Now, many of you will know I've never been accused of being evangelical. So her work didn't immediately thrill my Catholic academic soul, but did the person. Wow. I arrived at the church just as she began to preach. I was somewhere between the vestibule and the back of the church when she let out that famous bellow of hers. She began, "Grace is a lesbian." She had me at grace. I read everything she wrote. I appreciated her scholarship, but more so, I appreciated her incredible ability to help people feel loved and cared for by the divine. Yes, I loved her. My other indelible memory was introducing Virginia Ramey Mollenkott in 1999. Deborah Morrison, you were there, when Virginia was one of several recipients of the Lifetime Achievement Award from SAGE, Senior Action in a Gay Environment in New York City. Now you have to picture us gathered in an off-Broadway theater of an evening to honor the likes of musician Jerry Herman of Hello Dolly and La Cage aux Folles fame. Also in Virginia's cohort of honorees that night was Stormy DeLaveray, a drag king and singer with the Jewel Box Review, the first integrated drag review. Stormy was said to have been the person who threw the first punch at Stonewall. The artist Paul Kasmitz was also honored, but he was not with us that evening. Each of the honorees was presented by someone. I recall that Jerry Herman's was a video introduction, quite elaborate and quite wonderful. Stormy's was glitzy too. And then I had to get up and say a few words about Virginia. We were, shall we say, low tech. I said that her impact on religion made the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence seem like the Girl Scouts on a camping trip, because it was through her biblical scholarship that Virginia got to the heart of the matter and could not be disputed by homo-hating Christians. I can report that the house shook with applause for Virginia, who wowed them beyond my description as she brought her signature love and care for each one to the stage that night. At the party afterwards, she was surrounded by people who wanted to get to know this amazing person who made them feel loved and accepted in the eyes of God. What a gift. Long may her memory be a blessing. Thank you.
Okay, go.
Wow, thank you very much for everybody sharing their fond memories that they had with Mom. I mean, it's very humbling to hear everything from so many fantastic people out there that really loved her so much. There is so much that we could celebrate about her life, and together we go forward in this life. From knowing Mom, remembering our mother, grandmother, she was a mother to many, especially to those that felt like they were alone in life. She gave comfort to them, showing that somebody cared about their situation and tribulation that they were going through. Many times, their family just didn't care or want anything to do with them because they were different. The greatest thing that she cared was just simply love. Remember, she always wanted me to know that we are never alone. God is with us to give us purpose and comfort, no matter what we're going through. A couple of the Psalm 23 is one that we always would say. Lord is my shepherd, you make me lie down in green pastures. You lead me beside quiet waters. You refresh my soul. You guide me along the right path for God's name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely your goodness and mercy and love shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. And another one is the Lord's Prayer. Our Maker who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever and ever. Amen. Now, I just wanted to say a special thanks to Deb Morrison and Reverend Gail. They helped us get through the last few really tough months with Mom. And they all meant a lot to us, down to the last breath that she took. Gail was there, and Deborah. And thank you very much for your help. And Barbara also, my wife. God bless them for their help, because they cared so much. And for the family members that are out there, I want to say a special love and thanks to Jack Canning. You've known my mom longer than me.
Your cousins.
That's right, cousins. So
I had to
along with
remind
Jane.
him, Jack, that you were your cousin.
Yeah, well, I'm not one that speaks in front of a camera, so this is hard for me. We love you very much, and she left us so very much that we all remember the great gifts that she gave us in life. God bless.
Well, the Woman in Religion conference at Harvard was very meaningful to me for several reasons. One, I didn't know that any of the mainline scholars ever knew I even existed, and it was very nice to find out that some of them did. The woman who chaired my panel, when she met me, she said, "You're a legend in your own time." I had no idea that she knew the first thing, but she teaches, I guess, at Harvard, and she knew. And that was very encouraging. The response to my speech was very encouraging. People stood on chairs shouting, and I think it was partly that that I talked about gender. But see, that conference was very carefully organized. It was 1/3 older, experienced feminists in religion and scholarly types, and 1/3 more activist types, and 1/3 students. And the students were kind of upset that more wasn't done with gender. See, my belief is that we have to stop arguing, let us in, to treat us equal as gay people, and realize that we are part of a very much larger movement. It's a transgender movement, and we have to be in absolute solidarity with the intersexuals and the transsexuals and all the queers of every which type. And, in my opinion, a person who's not queer in a society like this is crazy. So it's either that's your choice, queer or crazy. Because if society is crazy, who wants to be like we're told women are supposed to be or men are supposed to be in this society? Both men and women are betrayed by the binary gender construct. And so we really need to go after that. And there will be no justice for women anywhere in the world, or children anywhere in the world, let alone gay people anywhere in the world, until we understand that we are in a gender crisis. And we need to open up now to everybody who is queer in any way, including those who are queer theologically. I mean, my best friends in the mainline churches are queer theologically. They know they're queer. They don't like the way the Christian church teaches people to behave.
Can you give an example?
Well, they believe the things Jesus believed. Jesus was queer. And, Jesus appealed to all the outcasts of his society. And the people that I love also care about all the outcasts and the people who don't have jobs and the people who are on welfare and, people who are hungry and homeless. And that's queer in this society where consumerism is everything. So give me queer any day. And I'm very proud of the word.
Hi, I'm Carter Hayward. Thank you everyone for making this webinar, this tribute possible. This is a glorious experience for me to see so many old friends and see people I had never met before, like Paul just now. It was very moving, and I feel very expanded through this experience we're all having right now together. Virginia's and my lives and journeys intersected way back when, back when the two of us were just beginning to be able to identify ourselves publicly as lesbians, and in something of a whisper at that. Back in the late 1970s and into the 80s, Virginia and I were like giddy girls whenever we get together. Just the two of us, or with our partners Deborah Morrison and Beverly Harrison. At the time, Virginia was teaching English literature at William Patterson in New Jersey, and I was teaching theology at the Episcopal Divinity School in Cambridge, but was spending a good bit of time at Union Seminary with Bev. Virginia and I, Bev, and Deborah became devoted buddies. We did a good bit of visiting back and forth across the George Washington Bridge to and from New Jersey and New York City. We broke bread together. We gossiped a lot. We went to movies. We shared stories of what was happening, Virginia and I, in our lives as lesbian theologians who had only recently begun to come out and make sexuality a primary focus of our life's work. One of my strongest, most visceral memories is of Virginia throwing her head back and laughing until she cried. I just have this incredible image of that beautiful woman laughing. During this period, we leaned on each other for professional camaraderie in organizations like the American Academy of Religion and the Society of Biblical Literature, where even the mention of gay and lesbian, much less studies, was shocking, silly, or repulsive to most serious scholars. At this time in the early 80s, Virginia and I would often be in the same sessions in these gatherings, one of us sometimes, often responding to the other's presentations. These were the days in which there weren't many out LGB, much less T or Q theologians in the Christian churches or anywhere else. So Virginia and I, along with a number of others, including some of you here in this gathering, found ourselves working together wherever we went. I would stress together. That teamwork, that sense of working and speaking and naming ourselves and naming our experiences of reality, of sexuality, of God, strengthened us all immeasurably. There was no one among us ever with a more compelling commitment to teamwork, mutuality, Godding as sacred relational movement, something to be shared, as Virginia Mollenkott. Indeed, looking back to those early days of queering theology before any of us called it queer, indeed, Virginia would be one of the very first to do so.
We lost you, Carter.
It's that mute button. Looking back to those early days of queering theology before any of us called it queer, and Virginia herself would be one of the very first to do so, the most important gift Virginia and I gave each other was a deep, abiding, transformative realization of two realities. One, we were not alone, ever. We were Godding together, truly sisters. Later, we would have said siblings, I suspect, close, friends, colleagues, pioneers on a shared mission to change the church. Second, we were right, not always, and certainly not about everything, but we were spot on about the churches needing to be cracked wide open in relation to gender and sexual justice in order to even begin to create welcoming spaces for its own people. I will always be grateful to Virginia for having fought these battles with me so early, side by side. We were serious, we were irrepressible in common purpose, and we were rooted and grounded in both the confidence and the laughter of the sacred. We have not had a more compassionate, empathic, kinder, intelligent, creative, courageous, tenacious sibling on the journey we share. Thank you.
I'm Marvin Ellison, and I'm joining you from Portland, Maine. And I'm very grateful for this occasion and for those who've organized it and for everyone who is participating. I feel so connected to Virginia's circle and to Virginia. There never was a binary category that Virginia Mollenkott liked. This faithful and courageous iconoclast deployed her wonderfully keen intelligence, large-heartedness, and sharp wit to discredit and debunk socially constructed systems, especially religious systems, were set up to maintain hierarchies of status, power, and value. Now, recently I checked out Wikipedia's biographical entry for her, which begins, Virginia Ramey Mollenkott is best known for her God of the Breath interpretation of El Shaddai. Seriously? I think some of us need to help edit and update Wikipedia, but that's not our work tonight. But I found myself grateful and resonating with the opening sentence of her New York Times obituary, which started, prominent Christian evangelicals prayed for her destruction, while others say Virginia Ramey Mollenkott saved their lives. Now, wasn't it feminist Flo Kennedy who said, if you're not catching hell, you're probably not doing very good work? Well, Virginia did very good work. When I first learned of her death, I thought of another feminist pioneer of the church, Maggie Kuhn, who, upon her forced retirement from the national staff of the Presbyterian Church, was so angry that she was forced to leave her work, that she founded the Gray Panthers, and then fiercely fought gender, age, and race discrimination with great vigor until the very end of her life. Maggie Kuhn's tombstone reads, "This is the only stone she left unturned," a sentiment that I think fits Virginia to a T. Now, I have to say, I think Virginia's life, like many of our lives, was full of contradictions. So here's a graduate of Bob Jones University who reveled in critical thinking, challenging conventional wisdom whenever it caused harm, or rested easy with injustice. Here's a brilliant evangelical with high regard for the Bible, who was also an Episcopalian who sat rather comfortably on a three-legged stool, carefully drawing on not only scripture, but multiple sources of knowledge to find meaning, including science, lived experience, and marginalized traditions. So here's a Milton scholar who earned her keep as a professor of English literature, but far better known for her theological publications and for her decades-long contributions as a scholar activist in the gender, sexual, and reproductive justice movement. But as I've been thinking about things, I'm so struck by how I think Virginia Mollenkott and Janie Sparr are quite the kindred spirits. Now, I think I could say that about many of us, but I just want to speak about these two together just for a moment because, you know, some years ago when Janie was blocked by Presbyterian officials from serving as pastor of a Rochester, New York church, that savvy congregation found a way where there was no way by commissioning Janie to make good, serious trouble as their designated lesbian evangelist. And I think quite similarly, Virginia may not have had that title, but she too traveled all over the place, speaking and facilitating countless workshops and conferences to share the good news of radical grace and welcome and justice love for LGBTQ folks, calling us and our allies to renewal of heart, of mind, of spirit, so that together we would make egalitarian community happen, connecting to each other and to the earth in mutual care and respect. Later in life, publicly identifying as bi-gender, Virginia continued to model such great relational integrity, demonstrating as she had throughout her life the power of authenticity, the power of coming out. Coming out, Virginia taught, involves more than publicly declaring one's identity or claiming one's self-respect, important as these are. Coming out is a moral and spiritual discipline, a never-ending process of breaking with the tyranny of the status quo and confronting whatever denigrates body or soul, yours or anyone else's. By coming out and making common cause with those who resist injustice anywhere and everywhere, we receive the gift of coming into community, where we cast our lot together. As a queer religionist, Virginia took deep delight in this kind of justice spirituality. And delight is the right word because, after all, isn't spirituality about desire, about sacred desire? What kind of people do we desire to be? And with whom do we desire to share our passion, our lives, our love? Among the biblical stories about Jesus, the question is asked, can anything good come out of Nazareth? Likewise, at some point, we might have asked ourselves, can anything good come out of Bob Jones University? Because of our beloved Virginia, the definitive answer is wholeheartedly yes. Yes, indeed. Blessed be.
Virginia Ramey Mollenkott was not only a theologian, I believe that they were a spiritual parent to so many of us in the search for answers to gender and sexuality questions. The work was done in terms of the science, in terms of the humanity, in terms of the spirituality that was much needed to give us cogent and clear answers to some of the hard questions about gender identification and human sexuality. I'm so grateful to have been in the company of Virginia Ramey Mollenkott on more than one occasion. We had a lot of fun, cracked a lot of jokes, but I have never taught a class on sexuality and spirituality without using some of the Mollenkott books, the many ones that are out there, and particularly Omnigender, because it answered so many questions to speak back to the vilification and the dismissing of validity among not only trans folks, but gender nonconforming folks and folks, just folks. It is my joy to celebrate the life and the ministry and the wisdom and the scholarship of Virginia Ramey Mollenkott. But when we lost Virginia, we lost a friend, a colleague, and a parent to our movement. Rest well. God bless.
I am Gail Ricciuti, coming to you from Rochester, New York. And I'm a retired Presbyterian minister and seminary professor. And attending to details, at the top of my script here, I printed unmute yourself, introduce yourself, and then I should have printed mop your eyes. So I was very grateful to Chris Page for their tears. Not so grateful now after all of these eloquent companions have spoken. I am pretty much wrecked, but I do have some things to say gratefully about Virginia. There are people who enter our lives as indescribable gifts. And Virginia was, as you've heard, for many of us, one of those. One aspect that always leapt out to me, a hallmark of her life, was mutuality. I experienced it in our very first exchange via snail mail, long before the days of the internet. As a pastor still on the younger side of my ministry, back in the early 80s, I had come pretty quickly to a realization that while my work every day required me to listen to others at great depth, there was no one, I realized, to whom I myself could turn to be heard that same way. I realized that I needed what was then most often called a spiritual director. And I began to search my mind for who that could possibly be. The more I searched inwardly, the more I could not shake the compelling urge to approach one I had never at that point personally met, who did not know me, and who, for all I knew, didn't even do that kind of work. Virginia Ramey Mollenkott. Now, I had heard Virginia speak as keynoter at several events and conferences. At that point, she and Letha Dawson-Scanzoni had published their book, Is the Homosexual My Neighbor? But it was still early in the LGBT ministry unfolding for Virginia. And she herself had only just begun to come out, so that often her themes varied from the image of God to against traditional images, to male and female equality, to other topics. But whatever her subject, as I listened to her, one deep impression always stood out to me, that this woman knew God. This woman knew God. Brilliant mind and mystic heart. What a combination. I told myself there was no way a full-time professor, public speaker, prolific author would even have time to respond to such a crazy request from a small-time preacher she didn't know. But finally, I wrote her a letter just to get it over with. A week or so later, a handwritten, hand-addressed envelope arrived at my office, and seeing the return address, I was deeply touched that someone with a plate as full as hers would be kind enough to write back to a stranger just to convey her regrets. But I found when I opened it, it was not a regrets letter at all. It said in part that while she hadn't specifically done spiritual direction work, she would be willing to take me on, but only on one condition, that the relationship be mutual, that the work be mutual. A young clergywoman got blown away that day, not even able to anticipate what a divine gift is about to unfold in her life. I tell the story now because it was one example of a life marked by profound mutuality, as you have heard, with colleagues, with friends, with family, with strangers. It was part of her calling, still being lived out as recently as last summer, when during one of her stays in the hospital, she was under the care of a particular nurse. When Virginia characteristically expressed genuine interest in that nurse's life, they began to chat, and the nurse ended up revealing that she was struggling with her teenage daughter's apparent awakening to a different gender identity. Virginia immediately arranged to give the woman a signed copy of Omnigender, which the nurse began to read that very night and came back to discuss with this heaven-sent patient. Afterward, Virginia expressed that she was certain that this very exchange had been the reason she had been hospitalized. And I have a hunch. A couple of new names were added to the universe's ever-growing ledger of lives saved because Virginia lived. I thank God for all she accomplished in this world and all she means to us who loved her, world without end. And so, my friends, let us join our hearts in prayer. O God, our lover, before whom generations rise and pass away, we give you thanks with our every breath for the life of Virginia Ramey Mollenkott, our beloved mentor, teacher, and friend. We sing our praise to you, Holy One, for everything in her that was good and kind, wise and brilliant, courageous and faithful, tender and strong. For the grace you gave her to love and live out your Christ in this world, and for the joy and light in which she now lives in your abiding presence. You have heard our words of gratitude, spoken, unspoken, and even yet incomplete, and we pray that she has too. In your loving power, the love that Virginia fiercely served and adored all her earthly life, grant us strength and clarity to carry her legacy by living out all she taught us on behalf of the disinherited of this earth. From our depths, we praise you for the love that knits us to her and will never let us go, and for this blessed teacher, sister, and soul friend, from whose living memory we draw strength to labor joyously on. In all your exquisite names we pray. Amen.
It is a great honor and privilege for the LGBTQ Religious Archives Network to host this celebration of the legacy of Dr. Virginia Ramey Mollenkott. What a powerful tribute we have been part of. I'm Mark Bowman, LGBTQ RAN Executive Director, and I want to give a shout out to our board members, Jim Mitulski and Justin Sabia Tannis, who conceived and planned this gathering. LGBTQ RAN is a grassroots initiative dedicated to preserving and studying the history of LGBTQ religious movements around the world. LGBTQ RAN is a small operation, but over the past 20 years, we have produced a wealth of information about our history, which you can find on our website. There you will find a collections catalog, biographical profiles, oral history interviews, online exhibitions, as well as educational and teaching resources. The first oral history interview we ever did was back in 2004, and it was with Virginia. You've heard excerpts from that interview in today's program, and you can listen to or read the whole interview on our website. Virginia and Susanna were faithful friends of LGBTQ RAN who made generous annual financial gifts for the past many years. One way you can honor Virginia's legacy is by making a gift to LGBTQ RAN in her name so that we can keep her story alive, along with the stories of countless other LGBTQ+ saints and pioneers. In the coming days, we will send you a link to the recording of today's glorious celebration so that you can share this tribute to Virginia with others. Together, we can preserve our voices and stories for future generations. Thank you.
What feminism did for me was teach me to trust my experience. And that was partly through reading feminist books, but partly also through a series of big dreams I had in which I was shown. I would always expect that the interpretation would be a beating. I would be getting a beating from God, and it would turn out to be the most beautiful, affirming dream. You know, it happened to me again and again and again. I would think, oh God, I got it this time, you know. Like once I dreamed I was the fool in the tarot pack. And so I thought, oh, well, you know, okay, so God's telling me I'm a big ass, you know. And then the more I studied the fool, I went, oh my goodness, you know, this is pretty wonderful stuff. My shortcomings are here, but also my strengths are here. So it was one dream after another in which I gradually came to trust that was coming out of the deep core of myself. Did you read my book, Sensuous Spirituality? I think I described this dream in it. I was in a bus and I was forced to get out and told to go down to the center of the woods. But there were lions and dragons and tigers at the edge of the woods. And so I was afraid, but I finally pierced it and went down, and in the depths of the woods there were these gorgeous gazelles dancing around a pole, and there was a spotlight on the pole. And this is my personality. I worked with a psychologist, and they said, this is your personality. Yes, you have damage. You know, get below the damage, and there's this gorgeous eternal being, then an eternal dance going around the tree of life, which is the pole, the center of the universe. So through that, and through the reading the feminist books, I came to trust my own experience, and that was vital.
So I want to again thank all the panelists for their brilliant sharing, and thank all the participants for coming this afternoon, this evening. Because of the time, we're not going to be able to have additional sharing of memories, but I will urge you to add the memories in the remembrance area on the LGBTQ Religious Archives Network website. And I know that there will be other services for Virginia also in the future. But let me say this again. Thank you, thank you, thank you for being part of this celebration this evening. And I want to take a particular moment to thank Asati Tahimba Ford, who is a staff member for the LGBT Religious Archives Network, whose technical expertise made this possible, especially on this scale, because it grew from what we thought would be a smallish Zoom call to a Zoom webinar that ended up having more than 100 participants. And we could not have done it. And we could not have had the film clips or the pictures and the audio clips and all of these participants without Asati's expertise. It was technical expertise, but also it was ministry. And so Asati, I honor you and thank you for making this event possible. So thank you again for being here. If you're not on our website, on our mailing list, make sure you are on the LGBT mailing list. And I'll offer this benediction. May the peace of Goddess, which encompasses all understanding, enfold us and hold us from this time forth and forevermore. Go in peace.